in the reporting that I found, but they were. I mean, it's a huge area, and the seas are pretty quick moving in that area. So where you're going to look kind of expands really fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, I mean, again, it's like you're lost at sea, right? It's not like if you get lost in the wilderness, people can, like find traces of you because you've like bumped into a tree or like you're leaving tracks behind you.
Or you're leaving piles of poop.
Yeah, piles of poop or like fire and camp debris. Like this is the sea. It moves so quickly. Like, Steve was just saying, it's not like you're going to just miraculously find like some pieces of the boat just floating wherever. I mean, it's so, yeah, I mean, again, the sea, it's harder to trace. I always think, because there's no, fire or whatever.
Exactly. There's no obvious signs left on the surface,
right.
I think is where we're headed with this.
Yeah, I mean, they can sink without a trace.
Yeah, and so nobody found any sign of them.
Yeah.
Now we step forward 10 years later, it's 1989, and if you remember John Naughton, he was one of the guys.
The marine biologist.
Yeah, the marine biologist. He was on a wildlife expedition on an atoll, which is called, and you're going to have to help me out here if I butcher this, Tongi?
I think it's Taongi. Or Taongi, maybe?
Okay.
I don't know. Something like that.
Well, this atoll, which is part of the Marshall Islands, is 2,000 miles west of Hawaii, which, to kind of give people a scale for in the global scheme of things, if you look at Hawaii and then you go west, it's halfway between Hawaii and New Guinea and the Philippines, which is
a long ways.
So kind of in the middle.
It's and it's an itty bitty atoll. It's really small, and I'll get into some of the descriptions of it.
With some sand on it.
Basically, that's what an atoll
like
is.
Like a sandbar,
Yeah. Well, Naughton discovered a boat on the island. It was a small boat, and he was kind of confused, and he checked it out, and then he saw the registration number, and he recognized that it was registered in Hawaii. And several feet from the boat, he found, and again, this is where the accounts vary a little bit, he found either a grave marked with heaped stones with a cross made out of driftwood, or a shallow grave. In either case, he found in that, either sticking out somewhere from it, a jawbone.
Like a human jawbone.
A human jawbone.
Huh.
Yes. And the Coast Guard got involved because there was a body, part of a body anyway, and they figured out...
And it could be traced to Hawaii, right?
Right.
It's so not that the Coast Guard just did like, there's body parts on an island.
In some island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean,
Yeah, I think the boat had a registration number or something.
Yeah, and it's kind of like every state has a certain way of making your license plate numbers.
Right.
Well, he recognized the registration number being a Hawaii number.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it means it starts with HI, but...
So I know he didn't dig up the grave, but did he grab the jawbone and take it back with him, or did he leave it?
I couldn't find if he picked it up and brought it back with him, or if somebody else came out and collected it and figured it out.
Like the Coast Guard came out.
Yeah. Well, obviously the Coast Guard, like we said, got involved, and they figured out that through the dental records that the jawbone belonged to Scott Moorman, which was one of the 5 of the men that were missing on the Sarah Joe.
And the registration, was that?
It was the Sarah Joe. So this is one of many weird bits. So the jawbone and the boat being there are not weird enough. But here's another weird bit. It's entirely possible, based on the currents of the ocean, that over the course of 3 months, a boat could drift from Hawaii to the Marshall Islands. The problem is, however, is that there was a government survey of the islands previous to this discovery, and that was done in about 1983. And when
that was the government of what? The Marshall Islands?
Yeah. And the Marshall Islands, oh gosh, who is it that is registered under? I want to say it's the French, but that is absolutely wrong. But they went there and they did a survey because they check out wildlife and all that kind of stuff in 1983, which would be 4 years after the Sarah Joe disappeared. There's no boat there. They didn't record that there was a boat there. So after that time frame, the boat mysteriously came aboard, and mysteriously this body was buried on the atoll. Just doesn't make any sense because it's a weird amount of time.
It's conceivable, though, because, I mean, it may be that the body and the boat were sort of washed ashore, but they got covered by sands, and then later on weather and waves and wind uncovered them again.
That's true.
And
it is an atoll.
Yeah, and then somebody came along and buried the body and put a cross up there.
Yeah.
So it's possible. It's also possible that these guys who were actually being paid to survey the islands were actually sort of did some shortcuts. Didn't go to every single one of them if they were supposed to.
And,
just sort of
and
made some
that's a
stuff
good
up.
point, because this particular atoll is the northmost atoll of the Marshall Islands. So it's the farthest north of the group, so it may have been that during the survey they were running a little behind.
And they
and
just
said,
said, let's just make some stuff
you
up.
know,
huh?
nobody's going to know that we didn't go there. Let's just call it good.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
That wouldn't
I don't
surprise
know
me.
that that's really the case.
Yeah.
But this has led a lot of people to try and figure out, well, what happened to the crew and how did the boat get here?
Right.
And the theories that I've found, there's not a lot, but there's a couple. And the first one is, well, it's kind of Scooby-Doo hinky. That's my best way to describe this.
Okay.
And I found this on a blog, and this is the only place that ever said I found this, but we'll just go ahead and run with it.
Yeah.
Is the theory is that the crew survived the storm, but for whatever reason their boat was incapacitated, so they're just floating at sea, and they're found by another vessel that happens to be pirates.
Arr.
So we're going with pirates here.
All right.
Okay.
A confrontation ensues, and at some point, Mormon is killed, and his body is left on the boat, and then the other crew members are taken off of the boat, and they just leave the boat. I'm guessing the idea was to scuttle it and let it sink to hide the evidence.
Easier to just throw the body and let the body sink.
Well, and the other thing is, if I'm a pirate, why would I scuttle a perfectly good boat that I could scrape all of the registration off and then resell? Because the value is not in the people, it's in the boat.
Yeah, they had nothing useful on them except for some beers. They could actually keep it for a tender for their boat, although they'd have to rename it. Because can you see Sarah Joe Pirates? You know, I mean, seriously.
No, that didn't seem like a very pirate-themed name.
No.
Well, that's the first theory that we've got.
Okay.
The second theory is that everybody went somewhere. So run with me here with this, because
I don't know.
This is part one. This theory is kind of splits off. So this is part one of the everybody else went somewhere. So Mormon stayed with the boat, and everybody else left mysteriously.
Okay.
There's a lot of theories trying to explain why the boat and Mormon, like I said, ended up on the island.
Sure.
Okay, well, if we think about the storm that was reported, this massive storm in this itsy-bitsy boat, for all intents and purposes, a tiny boat in a giant storm, it's quite possible that through the swells, people were getting washed off the boat. So it could be that Mormon, Odysseus style, ties himself to the boat.
Yeah.
Probably if the boat flipped over, that'd be a good idea.
Well, he ties himself to the boat thinking everybody else has been washed overboard and I don't want to go overboard, because this Boston whaler, it doesn't have, what's the term, Joe, when you've got an enclosed cabin? It's got an enclosed cabin. That's the exact word.
Yeah, it's just an open boat.
It's an open boat. So he may have tied himself on thinking, well, if a big wave hits, at least it won't knock me overboard. These boats, I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but the Boston whalers, they're reported to be virtually unsinkable. The gimmick has always been, for the company that makes the Boston whalers, they will take a saw to their boat. I think it was in the 60s, the guy who started the company took a big saw, cut the boat in half, and then motored the back half and so they will float regardless. So he might have known this and said, well, the boat's not going to go down. I'm just going to hang on for dear life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have had to, too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just say that he did that.
I guess, yeah, they'll float regardless. Anything will float regardless unless, like, literally it's just filled with water.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which a 40-foot swell would do.
It would swamp a boat.
Because, you know, this is, having looked at pictures now, it is literally just like the hull of a boat. It's not, there's just, no, it's just.
It's a windshield or a windscreen and a steering wheel and open boat.
Yeah.
That's all these 17-footers are.
So I can imagine if they were in 40-foot swells that it could have taken on a whole buttload of water and just.
And washed a couple of guys over,
Yeah.
and in desperation, what do? I'm going to strap myself in.
Because it's better to go down with the ship.
Well, you know the ship's probably not going to go down if you know about the boats. They're it might go to the water level, but it won't go all the way under. It
Right,
won't
you can
sink.
always get over.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's so buoyant.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we've got that. The theory then runs that he dies. Whether that is Mormon dies from an injury that he sustained when the boat's being flipped around, or he's tossed around, or what it might be, or he survives the storm but then dies of dehydration or
He
starvation.
tied himself too well.
He's tied to the boat. He's now permanently with a boat that he can't get off of.
Which was a great idea when there was a storm. But
Yep, but maybe not so great after the fact. Regardless, he stays with the ship, the body stays with the ship, and it floats and runs aground on this atoll. At that point, somebody else before Naughton finds the boat, and they find the body. And out of respect, they bury the body. And there's actually a little bit of evidence that adds some credibility to that theory. All the reports say that when they found the body, or found the jawbone, and they started digging in the grave, they also found 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch strips of paper with foil on top of paper. So it was a stack of paper, foil, so on. So it's a stack of these. This is evidently something that is done in a Chinese burial ritual, and that's to represent money and fortune in the next life. So people have theorized that it might have been some guys who were from China fishing in the area illegally. They find the boat, they find the body, they bury it, they leave this bit of a token as a custom to ferry him into the next life with good fortune, but they don't tell anybody. Because they're there illegally. And the last thing I want to do is report that I found this body when, oh, by the way, I shouldn't have been here in the first place. Is that the case? I don't know, but that's what folks have theorized. And I tried to find information about this supposed burial ritual. I found a lot of stuff that talks about there's the Chinese tradition where you burn effigies of things that you own in honor of your ancestors. So if you've ever been to, like, I've been to Chinatowns where you go into a store and it's paper cars and paper TVs and paper dresses and all these things. They're effigies that you burn in respect to your ancestors. Because your ancestor doesn't want you to actually burn the real thing, because that would be a waste of money.
Right.
But to burn these things in respect for them to help them in the next life. So I don't know if that's what it was, but they say that that's what was found with the body, so lend some credence.
Interesting.
That is part one of this theory. Part two diverges a little bit. Part two says that Mormon wasn't the only one who survived and made it to the atoll on the Marshall Islands. This version says that at least one other person from the crew would have survived, and that they both made it to the Marshall Islands and tried to live there shipwrecked until they could be rescued. The issue is that this atoll, if anybody wants to take the time to look this up on Google Earth, it's not a pleasant place. It's extremely arid. There's vegetation, but it's nothing that you would want to really eat. I mean, it's grasses and some bushes, but not food
no
stuff.
trees or shade
and how
either.
far is it from the next closest island?
It's a couple. It's like 100 or 300 miles from the next atoll. But that's the thing. It's a series of atolls. And then there's open ocean, and then more atolls. And an atoll, for anybody who doesn't know, is literally a coral reef that is built up high enough to catch sand, and then it creates an atoll. Typically will create a lagoon in the center. So this thing is kind of a D shape. And the boat hit on the right-hand curve of the D, and that's where they found it, because that's where the majority of the sand is at.
That's okay, yeah. I was thinking, well, maybe this person could have like escaped down the atolls to the Marshall Islands, which are inhabited and have some sort of society and.
But this is very far away.
But yeah, that's a huge distance to travel.
Yeah, and here's okay. So technically speaking, you could possibly survive if you were living on this atoll.
What's the distance to the very next door atoll, though? We're talking
that's
miles?
Yeah, that's it's over 100 miles if I remember correctly. I don't have the number written down, but I know it's not like you could swim there in a day.
Yeah.
In shark infested waters, because it's shark infested waters.
Yeah.
But you could live on the island, sort of off of the vegetation.
Well, or
there's
fish.
There's fish. There's a ton of migratory birds that come through there. Crabs. So you can get protein.
Right.
But the problem is water. 40 inches of annual rainfall on this atoll. So that's not a lot of water. If you got something to catch the water, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just trying to live off of it pooled up, you are jacked.
You're out of luck.
You're completely out of luck.
Yeah.
There's no way to make that happen.
Actually, was the boat smashed when they found it?
It doesn't say. I know it wasn't in good condition, but it doesn't say what condition the boat was in. I know that one of the family members has the boat now, and they have it as a bit of a memorial. And because it was 79, 89, 99, 09. So we're at the 35-year mark. So they just did a memorial at the 35-year mark.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the boat is seaworthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of being able to actually go out and motor around in it.
I just thought that'd make a nice water basin. Have the boats, clean the boat out, set it out there to catch rainwater.
I'm going to guess it probably had holes in it, and it's probably too big for one man to drag on his own. Maybe two could do it, but we've gone pretty far into the conditions on this atoll. But the theory is that Mormon dies, and then this other person, through some means, decides to get out of there. My friend has died. All my other friends are dead. I got to get off of this place.
He just swam out to sea and committed suicide.
And somehow tries to swim away to find something closer for whatever reason.
Well, he obviously tied some sea turtles together.
Exactly. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Because sea turtles are the best. Whoa, dude.
Yeah,
it's exactly it. No.
obviously.
Yeah, dolphins came by and rescued him.
Yeah, but the problem with the theory is how would this person, other than swimming, try to leave? Because it seems like a foolish venture if to try to swim hundreds of miles or 100 miles.
Again,
I don't think you could see the other atolls.
Right, but I guess it a little matters like how banged up the boat was / how much of the boat they found. Like if it had been cracked in two, he could have makeshift paddled this boat out, since apparently they float. If they're cut into 3 pieces even. You find a stick or something that will allow you to paddle, and you just say, well, I can't see another island, but I can't live here, so I'm just gonna take my chances and paddle on out.
But the hard part is, and what we don't know is, did whoever survived, if there was this other survivor, I would think if I was going to go on the open sea on a itsy bitsy piece of styrofoam and try and paddle my way away, I'd want to have supplies, as in water.
Yeah.
So is there anything that they had to hold water? Because if you just go out on the and paddle out on the ocean, within 5 hours you're done.
Well,
it kind of depends on what was left in the boat. Like, say they went out with at least one cooler. And if they had to have the forethought to strap it into the boat, then, and it didn't get lost in the storm, then the cooler could actually hold water. They might have had other things like balers on board.
Yeah, I mean,
it
theoretically,
depends
there's
on how much
things that could have
stuff was
held
left
water,
in
but the problem
boat.
is there's not standing fresh water
Yeah.
for you to collect.
I guess the
Yeah.
other thing is like you do dumb things to survive sometimes.
Yeah.
Like humans are great at making decisions in survival mode, and oftentimes they're just super stupid decisions.
They're really
Yeah.
bad.
So, like, right, you've just watched your friend die, you're super dehydrated, you're malnourished, you think, well, can't live here, don't have any fresh water, but better go out again. You know, you're not.
If you're that desperate, you'd do anything. But,
Right.
I mean, and there are, by the way, there are ways, if you have the proper materials, there are ways to desalinate water and purify water.
Right.
Plastic.
Yeah, clear plastic sheet does the trick every time, And
Yep,
so,
and it's a drip system.
yeah,
absolutely.
It's real
but,
easy to do if you're lucky enough to have some plastic sheeting, which
Yes.
they may or may not have had.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess something you collected in.
This doesn't address like the first theory that, of course, popped into my head was aliens. You're laughing, but seriously, like, okay, so if they really didn't find it when they did that geographic survey, right?
So you're using the time lag. Okay.
yeah,
So they went through a
disappeared.
wormhole, and then okay.
Something weird happened, and then they popped out, or a little bit of it dropped out. They seem to have disappeared for a really long time. Is it possible that this survey crew just didn't hit that atoll? Sure. But is it also possible that, like, there was some kind of time lapse and they just weren't there? Also, sure. Who knows? Who's to say that, like, they
I
didn't
can't say
hit
that's not possible.
another island in between? Surely there are more islands in between Hawaii and these atolls. Who's to say they didn't hit another island, stayed there for as long as possible,
Then
and
get
then
washed
realized,
away.
crap, we can't live here anymore, or
Oh.
decided, oh, we are going to live here, but our friend Mormon is dead, so let's give him a sea burial, send him out to sea. I mean, this is one of those ones, right, where there's like so little information that there are a multitude of crazy
And
theories.
that's the hard part. Is
they are.
that
Yeah.
all we know is they disappeared on that day.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, the boat and a buried body was found.
Was it
Yeah.
a full buried body?
Well,
Or was it
They
just the
found
jawbone?
not all the bones were actually in the grave.
Yeah,
correct?
I didn't get the impression that the entire body was there.
The impression I had was the only thing was there was a jawbone.
Which
but
would
I
be-
could be wrong.
Well, I had heard that somebody else later on found a bunch of bones, like vertebrae and stuff, like not in the grave, but like down by the water, in the rocks, near the water or something
Weird.
like that.
It's so weird.
So-
Yeah, I mean, there's all these. There's a lot of weird, conflicting stuff, and there's the problem with this is there's been a lot of interpreted writing about this story, as in people are taking liberties with it. And I know people take liberties with stories that we talk about all the time.
Sure.
But these people have turned it more into the stilling and on and on and on. It's like that
They
movie.
dramatized it, in other
Yeah,
words.
it's like the movie. What is it? The Greatest Storm.
Yeah, Perfect Storm.
The Perfect Storm. Yeah,
Yeah, they don't know exactly what
Yeah,
happened.
but somebody went ahead and is dramatizing it on their blog or on their free writing space, and then that gets mixed in.
Right.
Of
What we
course.
really know is boat disappeared, boat found, jawbone found.
Yeah.
And I mean, other than the fact that, okay, well, if truly it was found with this paper foil system, I could see that being a plausible explanation, but I have no idea what happened to the rest of the crew, nor what happened in the ensuing prior 10 years.
Right.
Well, assuming that they all five survived the storm and they found themselves up, obviously they must have been out of fuel, or maybe their engine crapped out, so they couldn't get back to Hawaii. So they were adrift for a long time, and of course, some of them might have been injured. Some of them, assuming one or another would have died from dehydration. And what do? You can either eat him, which is known to happen, or more likely they just pushed him overboard and get him a burial at sea, because you can't have a rotting corpse in your boat.
No. 'Cause that will kill you faster than
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah, and that might have been the case, that they kept dying off and getting thrown in the sea. Only one guy was left, and he died eventually, and just, spent years after that drifting in the boat, or months at least. Mm-hmm. And like Devin said, he could have gotten stuck on some other atoll for a while before being broken loose and sent onward. But yeah, I can't believe that they made it to any island.
It's amazing
Yeah.
that they made land anywhere.
Yeah, it kind of is, yeah.
Because boats drift for years and years and years and they never come aground.
Maybe,
so
who knows? Maybe he actually circled the world a couple of times. Who the hell knows?
it's possible.
This is such a good segue into my boat story.
We should probably start on your boat story because really we've run mine into the ground, no pun intended.
Yeah, the boat ends up on an island.
Yeah, mine also, it's, a boat on an island that a boat shouldn't be on,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I'm just going to jump right into mine.
Okay.
Cool with you guys? So we're going to talk about Bouvet Island. It's literally the most middle of nowhere you can be. It's widely touted as the most not obsolete. What's the word I'm looking for? Isolated.
Isolated out of
Yeah.
the way.
Out of
Place
the
I would
way.
never want to be.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think
it's
that's actually Southeast Oregon. I think,
it's 1,400 miles southwest of the tip of South Africa and about 1,100 miles north of Antarctica. So it's in the Arctic Circle, but it's just, it's so far away from everything.
Yeah,
Truly.
there's really nothing around.
There's nothing
Yeah.
around it. Yeah, it's
not a garden spot.
It's totally inhospitable to life. About 19 square miles large. 93% of it is a glacier. Again, totally inhospitable to life. And as is the case with many tiny islands, apparently they're super popular. Yeah. So this island was first sighted. I'm just going to give you guys a little history to inform where we're going with this. The island was first sighted on January 1st, 1739 by Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier. Is that how you would say that?
Sure.
Great. My French is really good. The island was later named for him. Unfortunately, this guy, it was January 1st. He was probably super hungover.
yeah, good point.
Wasn't great at accurately recording things because he wrote down the wrong coordinates and effectively lost the island until 1808.
Well,
Losing an island.
Well,
I lose my keys all the time. But
it was lost.
I lost an island.
The island, it's super tiny,
Lost
right?
human knowledge.
It's so tiny and so out of the way. It's
very
not
true.
even like there's an island right close to it, right? Like we were just talking about with the atolls. They're within 300 miles of each other, right? This actually
far away from everything. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a fun little bit. Thompson Island was said to have been close by, quote unquote. It didn't ever give any kind of nautical miles or anything like that. But as it turns out, that was just a phantom island. It was never an actual island. They were like, yeah, there's an island close to it, kind of. It's called Thompson Island. It's another mystery in and of itself. The fact that 4 or 5 different people said, yeah, there's an island over there, and it just never really existed, it turns out. So we'll talk about that maybe some other day.
Some other day.
So
Okay.
in 1808, British whaler named James Lindsay spotted Bouvet Island and, named it after himself, like you do. Yeah. So it was called Lindsay Island for a while. And then in 1825, George Norris claimed the island for the British Crown and named it Liverpool Island.
Liverpool.
Yeah.
Later,
Like, why are
My
these people,
favorite shaped pool.
Why
Yeah.
do people get so excited about this island? I wonder.
that's it, right? Somehow, super popular island. That's not the end of the history of it. Later, in 1927, Norway decided, oh, actually, that's our island because we're really close in proximity to it somehow.
Yeah.
So they landed on it and declared it was the dependency, and they renamed it after the original finder dude, Bouvet.
Okay.
Finder dude? Is that a technical
It is
term?
the technical
Finder
term.
dude, yeah.
Finder
Okay.
dude.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bouvet. Okay.
So in 1971, it became a nature preserve, although I'm not 100% sure what they're preserving. I think ice, maybe.
Yeah, I think there are
Seals and
I
sea
think-
lions.
Yeah, sea lions. And
They
stuff
have,
like
I'm
that.
sorry, they call them sea elephants.
Yeah.
Okay.
In literally every account I read of this, they talked about the sea elephants. And I had to Google it, what sea elephants were. And
To figure out it was a sea lion.
I think it's sea lions.
Yeah, sea
Yeah.
lions.
But apparently other people call them sea elephants. Somewhere between 1955 and 1958, some volcanic activity or maybe a landslide created a brand new ice-free rocky part of Bouvet Island, and it included a small lake or lagoon. I think
Yeah, they always call it
lagoon.
a lagoon.
They always,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's kind of
It's like the
interesting.
atolls. They always call them a lagoon, but
I
a
guess
lagoon
it's-
is...
I guess if it's a body of water inside an island, then it's,
I tend to
guess it's a
think
lagoon,
that
I
a
guess.
lagoon is attached to the outer to the ocean.
So it's kind of like a harbor.
Yeah, and this was hard to kind of, I guess, suss out. I looked at some drawings that expeditions had done, particularly pertaining to this little new bit and the mapping of it, and I couldn't get a really, really good sense of if it was a landlocked lake or a lagoon that like fed into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So that, again, is information to keep in your mind as we talk about this story, because it drastically changes how weird this story is.
Well, and there's maybe I'm jumping ahead, and if I am, tell me. But I remember seeing the photo, and I never saw an outlet of the lagoon.
Well, but it depends on what angle that photo was taken from, because it's my impression that it was taken from a boat as they left the island.
Ah.
So
Okay.
it was from...
Okay, yeah, and I don't want to get too far ahead.
Yeah. So...
And actually, I don't know if anybody's ever gone for a wade through the lagoon. It's not that big, and nobody even knows it could be 6 inches deep. I mean, it could just be a big puddle.
Well, actually, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So, this is an ice-free area of Bouvet Island, and as we previously...
For now.
For now. Well, actually, as we discussed, 93% of it is glacier. This is the 7% that is not. And a geologic survey expedition that went there measured the ground temperature, stuck a thermometer into the ground. It is 77 degrees Fahrenheit.
So it's volcanic.
It's super hot.
For that area, that's super warm.
For ground in general, I think 77 degrees is pretty freaking warm.
That's volcanic activity.
I don't know. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I could stick a thermometer in the front yard right now, and it'd be close.
Sure, but for a place that's 93% glacier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not glacier. That was in 1978 that measurement was taken. So you can assume that is the cooled version of the area that we're about to talk about.
Okay.
Or have been talking about. Again, accounts vary, but in 1964, either a helicopter or a British naval ship set out to explore this little bit of land, because Norway owns it now. So, of course, the British Navy took an extra big interest in it again.
Yeah,
Politics are hard to tell with
I
tiny little places like this.
was thinking that it was a Norwegian ship or something like that that had a helicopter pad and a helicopter. And
No, it was British.
Yeah, was it
For
British?
sure. That's the one thing I am sure of
Okay.
in this story is that it was British.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they choppered over.
They go to explore this little bit of land. They took some scientific measurements, and remember, this little bit of land is 10 years old at the time. They take scientific measurements. They kind of take a look around. Oh, and also they find a life raft in the middle of the newly formed lagoon.
Well, not a life raft, but actually a dinghy or boat.
Yeah, like a life raft, like an
wooden boat.
old-timey life raft.
Yeah.
Wooden. And from the map that I looked at, and again, I'm not saying with 100% certainty that this is how it is, but it looked like it was cut off from the ocean with scree, which is what they call jagged rocks. Mm-hmm. So a man by the name of Alan Crawford was a part of this expedition and wrote a book about it, and he described the site. Joe, would you?
Oh, yeah.
Joe's my go-to reader.
Narrator.
Yeah.
What drama, we wondered, was attached to this strange discovery? There were no markings to identify its origin or nationality. I'm going to do away with the dumb accent. On the rocks 100 yards away was a 44-gallon drum and a pair of oars with pieces of wood and a copper flotation or buoyancy tank opened out flat for some purpose. Thinking castaways might have landed, we made a brief search, but found no human remains.
So, puzzled, understandably, the expedition snaps a photo of the boat with an elephant seal close by. Another reason why they might have been in a rush to get out of there. And headed off because their window of time to leave this island was limited because the weather is so bad. In fact, this expedition had to sit at sea for like 5 days because the weather was so bad that they couldn't land.
And their entire expedition accounted for 45 minutes?
Yeah.
They were on the island for 45 minutes, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. So that's not a very thorough investigation.
Not really, no.
It's not. If you can stick with us, the mystery deepens a little bit. In 1966, 2 years later, give or take a couple months, another expedition made its way to Bouvet Island, this time allowing much more time for study. They were really interested in that new area and how it had formed and why it was remaining glacier-free. And they spent a lot of time looking at the lagoon as well because they thought, oh, this is an inhospitable kind of area. It's subarctic, and we're really interested in what kind of life thrives in subarctic temperatures. They did a lot of measurements in the lagoon, talked about the different types of algae that had flourished there despite the cold, but never once mentioned the fact that there was a lifeboat in there, or oars, or anything else on the shore around the lagoon, which leads many people to believe that 2 months later, the lifeboat, oars, buoyancy devices, whatever, were all gone.
Mm-hmm. That was only 2 months later?
2 years.
Or 2 years
2
later?
years. Okay, I was
Yeah.
about to ask what the 2 months was.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. 2 years.
Now, can I ask something to clarify because I didn't understand? It was a copper tank and they hammered it
Cut
flat?
it open and hammered it flat. That's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Uh,
And I wish that picture was better. There's just the one picture,
That's
right?
a pretty crude picture.
It's
yeah.
a pretty crude picture. But so you can see the lifeboat and an elephant seal, but you can't.
I thought
see
at first I
really-
thought the seal was the tank until I realized it was a seal. I felt really dumb.
Yeah.
Like
But-
who made an elephant a seal-shaped tank?
Yeah, there's none of the other. You can't see the stuff that was apparently on the shore.
Okay.
And so that for me is like a big. I can explain away what happened there if it's kind of like just an inlet lagoon that opens up into the sea.